Ladies and gentlemen, if you could find your places. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the October board meeting. Let me start by expressing condolences on behalf of the board to Chief Saunders on the passing of his mother, Clementina Saunders. And you'll notice the chief is not here today because of that, and so is represented by Deputy Chief Mike Federico. So if we could just read that into the minutes, condolences, I appreciate it. Declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Mr. Mayor?
Item 10 on the public agenda, Mr. Chair, is an item concerning the purchase of some equipment from Bell and Rogers, and I have an ongoing association which is disclosing the Integrity Commissioner with the Rogers family, and I declare interest and I'll send myself from the section of that item.
And I will declare a similar interest from a business point of view, conflict, and pass the chair over to you, Vice Chair Lee, for that item number 10, and recuse myself. Item number 2, confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on September 17th, 2015. Motion to approve. Vice Chair Lee, seconded. Ms. Molnar, all in favor? Carried. Item number 3, the new property and evidence management unit capital project closeout report. Okay, moved to receive by the councillor and seconded by.
Of the under budget by $2 million, which is commendable.
An adjusted budget under by $2 million. So that's seconded by Dr. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 4, the semi-annual publication of expenses. Motion to receive. Or, yep, you going to hold it?
Yeah, if I could just hold it.
Yep. Hold it, Councillor Carroll. Item number 5, the response is, okay, yep, hold. Mayor, item number 6 is the operating variance for the period ended July 31st, 2015 for the board. Motion to approve. Councillor Lee, seconded by Dr. Nuria. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Item 7, the award of construction services, 52 division renovations. Motion to approve. Motion to approve. Councillor Carroll, seconded. Councillor Lee. All in favor? Carried. Item 8, supplementary legal services for employment labor law 2015 and 16. Motion to approve. Councillor Carroll again. Ms. Molnar, all in favor? Carried unanimously. Item number 9, there is a written deposition, and I have some questions, so we will hold if it's all right for people. Item number 10, Councillor.
Thank you. Then motion to approve item 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, the two of you have to leave. That one has a turn off. Right. Now it's better. Do I Can I have a motion to approve? Yes, Dr. Noria, Councillor Carroll, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. And item 11, the chair can come back now. Thank you.
Item number 11 is the vendor of record for server hardware, software maintenance services and the professional technical services. Motion to approve. Councillor Lee, seconded Councillor Carroll. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Item number 12, the extension of Motorola vendor of record for voice radios. Motion to approve. Dr. Nuria and Councillor Lee seconding. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Item 13, the reappointment of special constables at the St. George campus of the U of T. Any questions? If not, motion. Dr. Nuria, seconded. Ms. Molnar, all in favor? Carried. Item 14, the new job description for the supervisor of forensic identification services. Motion to approve. Councillor Lee, seconded. Dr. Nuria, all in favor? Carried. Item 15 is the response to the board's recommendation to approve the timeliness of investigations conducted by the SIU. Any discussion on that, or can I have a motion to receive? Mayor Tory, Councillor Lee, all in favor? Carried unanimously. There are a large number of walk-on items, unfortunately. The first one is item 16, a body-worn camera project. That's a monthly report and update. Motion to receive. Councillor Carroll, seconded Councillor Lee. All in favor? Carried unanimously. The next one, item 17, I think, defer, you're suggesting, yeah. I think that's the right thing to do if we could defer it, because I think there will be, people will need an opportunity to look at it and may want to make some depositions, etc. So we will defer it to the November meeting. All in favor? Carried. The next one is the motion from City Council for the interim poverty reduction strategy. This is something that we have received at the end of July and seems to have been somewhat delayed, but I think it's also something that we may wish to defer, because I think the people are just seeing it now, and if we defer it to the November board meeting, there's an opportunity to hear from the public and have a more fulsome discussion. This, as I understand, is an ongoing project, so while there's an early fall initial deadline, we can still have input into it.
I was just going to move in that regard, Mr. Chair, that maybe we even defer it to our December meeting. While it means on the one hand we miss the opportunity to have any comments on the report that's going to be presented actually to the Executive Committee tomorrow, it means there are a great many things. This is a 20-year plan. And so in that regard, I think there's a real opportunity for us with a lot of our community policing initiatives and so on to be able to have some meaningful relationship and involvement in this. And if we deferred it for 1 month or two, I think we'd have a much more, much better idea of what we might work with the city on in terms of a report by then, which will have been finalized, but it's finalized for a 20-year 20-year period.
Councillor Carroll?
Yes, I would support that motion. I think we want to make it clear in the boardroom here today, however, that there are ongoing, perhaps the police service, perhaps more than any others, are working in the neighborhoods. We know that most of the impact of the poverty reduction strategy has to be felt every day of their work lives. So the work there is ongoing. I think it's important, though, there will be a big discussion about whether or not in the budget being put forward, launched December 2nd, are we putting in enough? I don't think we want to confuse the issue. What we want is for people to give deputations here at the police board telling us long range, how do you want us to put the poverty reduction lens on the police services work out there. So I heartily support deferring it 2 months so that there won't be any confusion that we're asking you to do this right now and somehow work it into the budget. That's a great idea.
Councillor Lee? Okay, so moved by Mayor Tory, seconded by Councillor Carroll, that we defer this item for fulsome discussion at the December board meeting. All in favor? Thank you. Carried unanimously. Bringing us to item 20, which is the 2016 Toronto Police Service operating budget, which we will have a presentation on, and 19, oh, sorry, I missed 19, yes. The Police Services Board budget is in front of you, and it is pretty straightforward. Is there a motion to, so moved, Councillor Lee, seconded? Ms. Mulliner, all in favor? So that then brings us to 20, which is the services budget. And there will be, it's held, but there's a presentation as well. The Parking Authority 2016 operating budget. Are you going to do a presentation on that, on the whole thing? So we will hold them all for the presentations. Okay, perfect. And that is it. So back to Councillor Carroll, you wanted to hold item number 4?
Yes, thank you. I just had a couple of quick questions. Because the 2015 budget passed in such the wink of an eye for me, this is a report on expenses to the end of the second quarter. So my question is, where are we in terms of projected actuals to the end of the year for these expense budget lines?
An easy question, Deputy Chief. I take it you're referring it to.
Well, the board, as you know, receives regular variance reports. We've rolled this up. This just deals with those expenses associated to those who are required to report their, publicly report their expenses to the board. But these expenses will be reflected in the variance report when the board receives the overall state of affairs for the budget in the next installment.
So anecdotally, can you give me an idea? Are we close to what our projected actuals are? Well, they may appear on different lines. What I'm getting at is, being a board member for not too terribly long, should the hair stand up on the back of my neck when I see 52,000 at the end of June, or should it not? Is that par for the course?
Tony?
The purpose of this report is really to ensure that we're transparent with the expenses that are incurred by our senior people. The accounts that you're talking about, Councillor Carroll, there's expenses from other members as well. So this is actually a very small population that's in front of you right now. I think we're trending. People can only spend money if the monies are there to spend. And I think we're fine from a budget perspective with respect to these accounts.
Okay, thank you. That's my only question, Mr. Chair.
Then, Councillor Carroll, motion to receive?
Well, with a comment.
Yes.
I'll move receipt, but I'll simply take it as an undertaking. While it's nice to highlight this, it would be good to have in this, if we're getting this report on a semi-annual basis, it would be good to at least have that comment. Here are the expenses, and, you know, FYI, on a projected estimate basis, we're on track. Even though they appear on different lines, I think given that this is going to be in a public agenda and therefore people will go, oh, he went where? We should at least be able to see in the report, but that's okay. That's what we expected and we're on track.
We're right on track.
Yeah.
So given that it's a semi-annual report, Deputy Chief,
So we could include a comment in the board report, of course, but to borrow a page out of the city, none of us are allowed to run a deficit. So this is only the amount of money has been approved to spend on business purposes. So
Right.
I can reassure the board that this reflects only the amount, only the expenditures we're authorized to spend and nothing more.
okay, on an annual basis, not a semi-annual basis. Okay. So Councillor Carroll, the motion to approve with that addition, seconded. Councillor Lee, all in favor?
I'm going to be a procedural wonk here again, I know, but I'm not adding it. I'm saying I'll take it as an undertaking,
Right.
if that could be mentioned next time. I don't need it added into the recommendation. Yeah.
Councillor
Okay.
Lee, all in favor? Okay, carried unanimously. Item 5, Mayor Tory.
I just had some questions. Would they be of the deputy chief with respect to the POAs? I'll just go ahead and ask them and he can figure it. First of all, I've mentioned before, the first sort of, I guess, eye-opener that I had when I arrived about a year ago was at a meeting where they reported that the revenues from these POA tickets were down by $35 million. And of course, this backs that up. And that's what I think led to this request for this report to be given to the city's public service. So just some questions in that regard. First of all, are the warnings, the new approach to traffic enforcement, as the report calls it, are these warnings here to stay as a proportion of the number of people who are stopped? I mean, would you expect going forward that this kind of proportion, which is less people being given tickets and more people being given warnings, and the warnings continue to increase, would be a pattern that would continue as part of your best judgment as to how to promote public safety?
I'll answer that in two parts. The warnings themselves are here to stay, but whether or not a warning is appropriate in every circumstance that we're currently experiencing right now will be the result of an evaluation. We are expecting that officers are exercising lawful and good judgment in using warnings, but we're also evaluating to make sure that those circumstances are in fact appropriate. And so it's difficult to predict exactly where the warnings will fall out in comparison to actual enforcement activity. But as a matter of practice, the warnings is an institutionalized practice right now.
All right, and just in that regard, thank you for that. Can I assume that our super-duper technology, which I'll come to in a minute, actually allows those warnings to be recorded so that you could see if, for example, Joe Smith had been given 5 warnings when in fact he should have been given 1 and 4 tickets or something? Can you actually see that so that after a period of time with this warning regime, we could analyze, what you just said as to the efficacy of the warnings and, whether they're being abused because it's a hassle to write up a ticket or whatever?
So the simple answer is yes. The system has in place a record keeping, and the system expects the police officer to check this record in order to determine whether or not the person they've stopped has been previously warned, and then the officer can make a decision accordingly.
All right, and then moving on from there, the super-duper technology, as I call it, brought in the name of quote-unquote progress, it's called Versadex. I mean, frontline officers have told me, and I shared this with the chief last week, that it's a nightmare. I mean, and that that's why I say quote-unquote progress. And it's even alluded to in the report in slightly more polite language, and says that, and one of the suggestions a frontline officer gave me, for example, is maybe now, a couple of years in, it's time to have a training course on how to use this, because it sometimes is better when you've had it with you for a period of time. But I wanted to ask you how big a problem you think this is in an instance where an officer might say, you know what, I should be writing a ticket here, but it's such a hassle to write a ticket in terms of what I have to do that I'm just not going to write a ticket, and that they end up as well being less productive. Would you agree that they're just being less productive where they could be writing 2 tickets for 2 left turns, but they're so busy writing the first one they never get to the second one? Is that going on?
We evaluate to see if that is. There's always the human component and take corrective action where it's necessary. We continue to have faith in the system. It's proven much more reliable in the overall processing of information and aids to carrying out our mandate, including law enforcement. But as we hear of specific incidents of frustration, we take a look at whether or not it is competence or whether or not it is the system problem. So we actually have what's called a business change management unit, which is overseeing the Versatex product literally on a daily basis.
Well, I would appreciate it just as a request if you would ask the business change unit whether in light of this comment right here in the staff's own report, plus what I hear from frontline officers, they would consider on the human side of this, having a training program that sort of follows up on the one originally given 2 years in and sort of helps people with difficulties they're clearly having with these machines. So all that having been said, the third question I wanted to ask is this. Am I correct in assuming that if there's a hugely reduced number of Provincial Offences Act tickets being written, there therefore would be a hugely reduced court attendance and therefore a somewhat reduced expense on court attendance by officers, because if you're not writing tickets and there aren't trials going on, then there won't be as many court appearances. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think that's true. We would expect to see a corresponding impact on our court attendance for Highway Traffic Act or Provincial Offences Act. Yep.
Thank you.
Lee?
Thank you very much. And following on the Mayor Tory's question about warnings, do we share these warnings with other jurisdictions like Durham and York and Peel as well? Because, you know, they can be getting warnings all over the region and no tickets issued.
I admit that's a bit of a gap because our systems aren't interoperable at that level of granularity, but there's certainly something we can explore. So right now, it's a system that Toronto Police uses within the Toronto Police boundaries.
Okay, but the other jurisdictions also use the same system, right?
There are several other services who do use warnings as a matter of practice, but it's a local decision to make, so some may not.
Thank you.
Councillor Carroll, you look like you're formulating a question.
Well, I just wonder if we're not going to end up, at the date we start trying to share warnings, we're going to end up in a legal quagmire. Because if you're not actually leveling a charge, what latitude do we have to then go on to other municipalities and say, hey, guess what we did with this one individual? I don't know that we have that legal latitude. Yeah.
So I have sorry, Carl?
No, that was an issue I was going to raise, but since it was phrased as a question, has possibly come back to report on it. I don't know if that's going to happen, that there may be privacy issues involved in the whole idea, but it was something that could be investigated and assessed.
Just to follow up from the mayor's comment, you say this will be evaluated. In what time frame and when will we know? What the is it ongoing? Is there a planned drop dead date that? And when will we look at all the figures to see if the warnings are having effect and saving, or is it just a hoped for?
We haven't established a timeline, a specific timeline with some milestone dates because it's still a relatively new project, so it's still under evaluation. But that's a discussion I'll certainly have with the chief about whether or not there's a point in time in the next year, perhaps, that we come back with a report to the board on the evaluation.
When did we start? Was there an absolute date we started?
Yeah, partway through, at the end of 2014, so we've only just, had it less than a year in operation,
So we're 10 months into it, really?
approximately.
Okay. Because I think the board members would like to see that evaluation as to what the benefit is.
Yep.
Any other questions for the deputy? If not, may I have a motion to approve? Councillor Lee, seconded. Ms. Mueller, all in favor? Carried. Brings us to item number 9. There is, I think you've got a written deposition there, but I had some questions as well. I don't know if other board members did on this issue. Mayor Tory? Is there anything you wanted to raise?
Well, I just wondered if maybe Deputy Federico or one of his colleagues could what I see happening here is that there's a problem with the servicing of the current models, and I think we all understand that, where people just declare these manufacturers they're not servicing a given model anymore, and you have no choice at that stage, I assume. But could you just go through what's happened here, because it just seems it's a big purchase being made, and we're constrained in terms of our resources. And
Yeah, I just, if I might just, Christmas tree onto that, add to that, they have a recommendation here which says basically we need to replace these and we're going to replace it with the X2, but but unless I missed it, I didn't see the cost differential between the upgraded the 26P and the X2. And I just wonder if there is a significant savings, and I also wonder about the whole cycle here, and, you know, so.
Well, perhaps I could deal with the history. The context behind this request is based upon the need to replace inventory that has reached the end of its useful life. So the devices that we currently have are starting to experiencing some failure rates. They are earlier technology that is being replaced by advances in the device. It is resulting in us trying to access a device that's no longer supported by the manufacturer in order to keep our inventory up. These devices are carried by, as the board knows, supervisors, members on patrol, and members in squads. So these are actively being used devices. We're not warehousing them. These are devices that are being carried by our police officers for the purpose of allowing them a force option under the proper circumstances. The reason why we're recommending this particular device, the X2, is it offers features that create greater accountability in the interest of the public interest and a higher degree of safety for both the officer and the individual. They're also the more advanced device than the interim X26P, which just offered a slight upgrade in battery performance and in some monitoring. The X2 offers the advancements of, for example, charger current monitoring, so that when the subject is actually struck by the device can calculate how much current is necessary in order to carry out its function, which is to incapacitate and not just deliver the full charge that the previous devices provided. Of course, the feature that allows an officer to fire a second shot if the first one doesn't work offers greater officer safety. And of course, this device is used to incapacitate the person, stop the person from engaged in that unhealthy or risky activity. And that can include instances of self-harm. So it's a superior product in that regard. So that's why we don't make a comparison between that and the X26P, which is that kind of interim model. We're making the recommendation that we go to the superior model. And then finally, this is what's contemplated within our budget as part of our life cycle replacement. So we're not asking for new money. We're just simply notifying the board that we have the funds within our 2015 budget to make the purchases. Does that help?
Yeah, but you didn't, you explained the difference between the 26B and the X, but is there a dollar difference between the two? In other words, the one is just an upgrade of the one we're using now. Presumably that is serviced by the company, will continue to be, but it doesn't offer the features of the X. What's the difference in price between the individual units?
I think it's a couple of $100 less than a couple of $100 per unit.
Okay. Another question is, how we get an annual taser report, I think, update on the use of tasers, and that. Can you say just off the top of your head whether we're using tasers more or less, or because it's just the supervisory staff that have them? Is that correct?
Right now, it is only supervisory staff that the service has issued them to, and our year-over-year usage is relatively the same. I think last year there was a reduction in the number of times we used it. So it demonstrates that police officers are using the device very judiciously, exercising sound judgment, and very careful about the circumstances under which the device gets used. In that regard, in respect to the submission by the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition, I certainly want to acknowledge that they have recognized the low rate of use of force generally, and I think that's a tribute to the sound judgment our police officers have used, sound board policies, good procedures, excellent training. It's a reflection that in Toronto, the experience of police in use of force represents an extremely low percentage of encounters. Toronto police officers use of force literally less than 1% of the time when they're encountering somebody in either a confrontation or an apprehension circumstance. And this data actually provided by the TPAC supports that as well.
Through your excellent report last month on the use of force of people in crisis, is there the what's referred to as the sock gun is another method of disengagement. Is that something that over time we might find that the taser is no longer needed because, or do they do something quite different that? Because my guess is the sock gun's a lot cheaper than the taser without the maintenance issue.
Sure, there's a difference in price and the technology, but you raise a very good point. The two devices are designed to do two different things. The sock round does not incapacitate, so the person is still able to carry out their function, or is potentially still able to carry out their goal. So if it was to advance on somebody, including the police officer, the sock round may deter them from doing so.
Yeah.
The CEW, though, distinct from the sock round, first of all, I made the point, it's worth repeating, it's a less injurious use of force option. The sock round is going to have a, quote, impact on the individual, whereas the CEW has been proven to be less injurious. The second thing is the CEW incapacitates. That puts a stop to the person's ability, their muscular neural ability to actually carry out their goal, whereas the sock round may or may not. And so there's a distinction. So at this point, we have no plans to decommission or withdraw any one of our force options from our inventory, CEW, sock, OC spray, or baton.
Thanks. Dr. Nuria?
I had many of the procedural questions which Andy has asked. However, a couple of them I'll just, you said there were 522 CEWs that you'd be using. And the senior officers or supervising staff use it less than 1% of time. Are there any specific indications as to when they would use it? No, let me finish my question so you can answer one after the other. So when would reasons for using it? How often are they deployed? How often are they successful in this? Because you see, sometimes they just pick up the thing and not just fire it. Okay? And is there an opportunity for body-worn cameras to be activated when they use it? So we see this deployment in action. And I do know that you provide a report to the board, but if these specifics are included, it would be helpful.
So I'll try and answer the questions in order. The justification to use the device is established both in law and by service procedures. And the threshold, or when it's appropriate to use the CEW, is when the person is displaying assaultive behavior, as defined by the criminal code, or there is a need for the police officer to take control of the individual, and I would say under circumstances where somebody's threatening to commit suicide or attempting to commit suicide. So it's a threshold established by both the law and by our procedures. That threshold applies to policing in the province of Ontario, so obviously Toronto Police are consistent with the use of force threshold throughout the province. As to its effectiveness, we found that it enjoys a high rate of effectiveness. Effectiveness is defined as compliance by the individual, control of the individual. You alluded to the fact, Dr. Nuria, that in many cases we resolve the situation and gain the cooperation of the individual by simply displaying the device, simply showing the person that we have this force option available to us, and that if they follow our instructions, we won't have to use it. And in the majority of cases, annually, we see this as a pattern, people will follow the instructions of the police officer, including those who are assessed as being emotionally disturbed. So I rate the effectiveness as extremely high, well into the 80s and 90%. And the only times that we found it ineffective in actual application, when it's actually been struck, is when the probes don't actually land in an effective way. And by the way, that's one of the advanced features of the X2 is the ability to actually predict where the probes are going to land. The device has a better aiming system. And then your third point about body-worn cameras, yes, those who are equipped with body-worn cameras include those who are equipped with CEWs, and we use the body-worn camera as a way to also assess the officer's decision to use force. The fact that we've introduced body-worn cameras, we're not at this point recommending a CEW with a camera because we may not need it. It may be supplanted by the fact that the body-worn camera proves to be a much more effective way of capturing the actual event. The CEW body-worn camera is limited to when the device is actually activated, then the camera comes on. It isn't capturing the entire situation pre and post-event. So we have greater confidence in the body-worn camera as a project than the camera-equipped CEWs. That answers your question.
Okay, so am I to understand that everyone who uses CEW has a body-worn camera?
No, different project.
No, not at this point.
Not at the,
Right.
but then what I'm suggesting is that people who do use CEWs should have one.
The difficulty
Because
is,
that's the, rather than having it on the device.
right, so we're sensitive to that. The difficulty is the ability for the service to introduce body-worn cameras as a pilot project, the limited number of cameras available, the fact that we're evaluating the camera as an overall system, limited the number of people we could actually distribute the CEW to. But we did make sure that there is a representative sample of those with the CEW in the body-worn camera project. And that'll be evaluated at the end of the body-worn camera project.
Ms. Muller?
I have a few questions. My first general question is around the fact that this item is coming before the board. Do we ordinarily have requests from the service for approval of budget items on weapons?
Not normally, but the board has expressed an interest in this device specifically, and so we're sharing our plans, so to speak, with the board. And it also represents this year, budget year, an expenditure. So you're right, these would normally be, and historically have been, considered operational decisions exclusively to the chief, but recognizing the nature of the device and the public interest in the device, we're sharing that information with the board. But this is a life cycle exercise. It's not the introduction of new technology. It isn't the introduction of an expanded inventory. It's to replace current inventory. And from time to time, we might come to you and say, we need to make decisions around vehicles or other uniform equipment.
And I have a few other questions, but I think Mr. Veneziano would like to comment.
Just to add to what the acting chief said, one of the main reasons also that this report's in front of you is that the expenditure is over $500,000, and so under the board bylaw, it requires board approval, including the vendor that we're using. So just to make that clear.
Thank you for that reminder. My second question is around the number of CEW weapons overall, which I see is in the report. Am I to understand that if we were to replace, as a result of life cycle replacement, these CEWs, that would not increase the inventory of CEWs in the available for use?
You're correct. It does not increase the inventory. It replaces the inventory.
And a similar question, are we, on page 2, you make the point that the service has restricted the use of CWs to supervisors and tactical team members. Am I to assume that means that this report doesn't change that? We will continue to restrict the use to supervisors and tactical team members?
That's a safe assumption, yep.
Okay. And a couple more. This is about a very specific point around what I call the double discharge, which is would be eliminated if you purchase a particular type of CEW. Do you happen to know how often the cartridge change has been an issue with the current CEW? Because it's mentioned this has proven challenging in dynamic situations, which suggests that you actually have tracked it.
Yes, in our annual report, we do indicate whether or not there were circumstances where the device didn't operate as intended, and that's when the shot wasn't, didn't hit the person, or there's some other reason. So that is tracked in the annual report, and there are a number of instances where the first application didn't work. In some cases, we've been fortunate enough when there's been a second device available, it's been able to follow up, but in other cases, we've had to resort to another use of force. And the risk, of course, is that use of force may have to be escalated. So we do track it. It's in the annual report we provide to the board. And that report not only has a narrative, it also has tables with greater detail on the actual experience with the device. So whether it was used, whether another force option was used, whether or not it was effective in its use.
And this is very technical, and you may not know the answer. Is it the absolute, is the default that if it does not discharge the first time, it automatically goes to the second discharge?
Very good question. No, the police officer has to make a deliberate choice and take a deliberate action in order to fire the second shot or reapply the device. So it's not automatic. And that's another feature of the new device. The actual current has to be a conscious decision to apply as well. It's not just an uninterrupted application of current. The officer has to be aware of the fact that the person is receiving the current and make a decision to continue applying the current.
And I noticed that that may be partly why there's 4 extra hours of training accorded to this device.
In consultation with the ministry, and I'm very happy to say that Toronto had a significant impact on the ministry standards, insisted on expanding the training to include 4 hours, and those 4 hours are dedicated to judgment training. So irrespective of the weapon chosen by the police officer under circumstances, the fundamental question is, was a use of force necessary at all? And that gets explored in those 4 extra hours of training. So very thorough in training and examining sound judgment as a necessary practice.
One
That's
last
why-
question. Thank you. What happens if we don't purchase these now?
We would be, in effect, reducing the current level of force options available. We would see a steady reduction in the availability of a weapon we've already decided is an important use of force option for police officers. That means fewer police officers would have the weapon.
Because the old ones would be deemed non-functional?
In fact, some of the old ones are actually physically failing, and we don't have a way to replace them. I mean, it's like anything else. It just becomes unusable, and therefore you're depleting your inventory. So it's a good point. This proposal here is to simply replace existing inventory, not expand it, just to continue to make sure we continue to meet our commitment that we've already made.
Can you remind me how many times they were discharged last year?
207 times, I think, or 270 times. I'd have to check. It's in the board record.
So they wear out pretty quickly.
They're pretty reliable devices, but most of our devices now are 7 years and older, and so we're experiencing, even though the device doesn't actually get applied, and the majority of times it's not applied, it has to be cycled and tested every time it goes out on the road. That's part of the actual protocol and device maintenance. And so the device is being used literally on a daily basis. And so that accounts for some of the wear and tear on the device. It's not being applied against individuals, but in order to activate the device, every person who's equipped with one has to do a test before they go out on the road to make sure that the device is working, and that starts to wear on the device.
So, not for today, but just doing some quick math, that's still a very expensive per use of the device, given that they're $1,500 each if you use it.
Well, in fact, we've had these in our inventory for over 10 years, and this is really the first serious request to replace the inventory. So, and we anticipated that in our 2015 budget. So, again, we're asking to spend the money that we've already committed to replacing the inventory, and we're now at a point where we are experiencing failures at a rate that requires an immediate replacement.
So are these the original weapons that were purchased?
Pretty much.
Generation
We
of the
went,
Trump police?
there's the second generation. From 2000 onward, we had a first version. This is the second version that was introduced into our inventory, I think around 2005, 2006. We made one final purchase in 2014, the last of the stock, so that we could equip the 25 sergeants who were recently promoted. But we've reached a point now where the manufacturer, they're not supporting the current model in terms of warranty. If we tried to keep the old stock, we would be left with trying to source outside of our contract, outside of the service provider, parts and equipment, and I suspect, that might present challenges for the board in terms of its purchasing bylaw, and I certainly think it would present difficulties for us to establishing a reliable source of inventory. So,
Thank you. I think you can tell by the amount of interest in this issue how much the board is still interested in tasers and how much we use or don't use. Councillor Carroll, did you have your hand up?
Yes, so all the questions have been asked about the weapons themselves and the usage. But there are some things, I know that eventually, the force, the services may want to come forward talking about expanded, equipping of officers of these, but before that time comes, I'm kind of concerned that there's still only one firm that we're allowed to buy them from. We're forced to sole source from the one approved source. And if we were to expand use, we'd be about the biggest customer in the country. So my question is, we may be now, we're probably the biggest customer now. For how long are we going to be forced to work with one supplier? And have we done a scan? Do we know whether or not there are in fact a greater number of suppliers now? We're just not being allowed to use them and do proper tendering?
So I can answer that by indicating that this is the only device approved by our ministry at this point, but it is an active and live conversation with the ministry around setting specifications for a type of weapon. And then, of course, the ministry shares the same kind of concern that are there competing manufacturers that we might be able to access who meet the specifications. But right now, Taser is the only one that meets the specification set by the ministry, but it is a topic of much discussion, I can assure you.
Okay, the reason I asked that question, Mr. Chair, and I'll ask the Deputy Chief, the reason I asked that question is I also see we're buying in a way that this particular type of weapon is becoming more complex. And I can see us very soon down the road, especially if we were to deploy it more widely, wanting a service contract for a more complex weapon. But you really don't want to talk about service contracts when you are in a legislated sole source situation. So I'm wondering if you asked about, given the greater complexity of this weapon, is there a warranty? Is there a shelf life? What are we looking at as we go down this road with yet another single source expensive purchase?
So we buy a contract that includes service as well as the weapon. So that's part of our relationship with both our distributor and our vendor. So there's a warranty package with the device. That's why it is a cost-saving initiative in the long term to acquire the new device, because the new device is supported. That support comes in the form of a warranty and of course, available parts.
For how long?
5 years.
For 5. Okay. And as Mr. Sewell has just walked in,
Yes.
can you speak to us? We talked about whether we would want to or not want to look at a weapon that had a built-in camera. Does such a thing exist? Is it exorbitantly expensive? Just so that we know if we want it to be part of our consideration later on down the line.
So our service has made the decision to explore body-worn cameras as a way of capturing the encounters police have with our community members. So as the board knows, the public knows, we're right deep now involved in a body-worn camera pilot project to determine the efficacy of the camera, public policy interests, to introduce another form of video monitoring of events by way of a taser camera, a CW camera. It adds both a measure of cost and complexity. One of the limitations of the taser cameras is it's only activated when the taser is turned on. whereas the body-worn camera is activated when the officer approaches the situation, so there is a
Yeah,
more complete...
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm, in the interest of time, I heard that in your answer earlier, all of that. What I'm asking is, should we decide to go another way and have another consideration, have you looked at the field? Does it exist? Is it available from our supplier? If we wanted to look at it later for other reasons, do we have knowledge of it as a piece of equipment?
Yes, Taser International does market a taser with a camera on it,
Okay.
and all the same conditions apply as I previously mentioned.
Yeah,
But it's a different camera system than the body-worn camera system. So.
Right, okay.
And it comes at extra cost, obviously.
Obviously, but as you said, it's only activated once it's fired. So, yeah, yeah, gotcha. Yep. Okay. Any other questions for Deputy Federico?
Okay. I think if there are no further questions, I'd like to make the recommendation, Mr. Chair.
Approve the report by Dr. Nuria, seconded by Councillor Lee. All in favor? Sorry, and as per the screen, and receive the submission from the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition, which we had. So, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. Which brings us now to 2021-22, I think, which Mr. Luciano is going to make a presentation. Sorry? We'll have... Yes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and board members. Joining me today to do a presentation on our 2016 operating budget, the parking enforcement operating budget, as well as the services capital budget, is our Director of Finance and Business Management, Sandra Calafretti. So today we're going to do a service overview. Like I said, we're going to give you some history on our operating budgets, talk about our operating budget request, and as well our capital program, and we'll also talk about the parking enforcement budget. We have technical difficulties. If you go to page 4 on your slides, which I hope are in front of you. Where's the slides?
No, it's in this one right here.
Where's the slides? They did. There should be well, you can follow, I guess, now on the, there should be a paper copy of the slides as well. Exactly.
What we've got is
We
just
made
this.
copies, we just don't know where they are.
We've got a written narrative.
Yeah, we can follow this for now. Can we get somebody to look for that? Okay, so in terms of to the next one. Service calls. Can we just take a 5-minute break to get this, because our technology is not working, our paper is not working, so.
Okay, we will... Are you getting copies of the deck for us then? Okay. Why don't we do exactly that? We'll take a 5-minute... Carl, we can do that? Good, 5 minutes. Do I get to use this? Yeah, I have. I was hoping you put your hand there. Okay.
Okay,
Okay, Tony, you
my
ready?
apologies.
Okay, thank you.
So Dee, if you can go to significant accomplishments. So in 2015, one of our main duties was to the execution of security for the Pan Am Games, which was a huge success. We started our customer service excellence initiative, and I can't understate the importance of this, which basically requires all of our members to provide professional, respectful service to the public that's free from bias. But if you look at the things that are on the list, PACER, Yakabuchi, cybercrime, it talks to risk management, it talks to transparency, it talks to accountability, and it talks to respectful engagements with members of the public that will promote trust. In terms of challenges that are beyond our control, the collective agreement, which if you look at the numbers that were negotiated, it actually results in quite a savings from prior years, where the increases were closer to 3%. And as you see, if you move to 2017 or 18, we're actually below 2%, and actually we're below 2% from 16 and 17, but we're at 1.75% in 2018, which is good news in terms of the monies that we have to pay out. There's also bargain benefits and requirements that are part of our budget. We're still having to pay for retention pay, two-person vehicles, which are things that are going to be addressed. And then we're subject to market-driven prices. When we go out to the market, there's certain increases that and obligations that we have to meet. The other challenge in 2016 is the loss of TAVIS. This is $5 million that we've gotten from the province since 2006, and it appears that we will not be getting and was not included in our budget request. Further challenges, we're dealing with an aging population, and so who are victimized. We continue to implement continuous improvement initiatives, and one of the issues there is the capacity and the investment that people have to make in addition to doing their day-to-day duties. Changes, as I indicated before, in crime trends in terms of cybercrime. We're still recovering from the civilian hiring freeze. There is a level of uncertainty around the provincial grants beyond just TAVIS as a result of us going below the threshold. And of course, trust is, like I said in the previous slide, is something that's paramount to us. If we want the community to engage and work with us in solving crime and keeping the public safe, then all of our interactions with them have to be professional, respectful, and have to be free from bias. There's also been, and I'll talk about it a little later, an increase in shooting incidents and mental health calls, which is, again, a growing concern. So I talked about relationship building with the community, including the way reframing the contacts. Diversity. The city is very diverse, and that creates an opportunity for us in terms of making sure that the people that we have working of us reflect the face of the city. We see that not as a challenge, but as an opportunity, and we work very hard to ensure that our workforce is diverse in terms of gender, in terms of visible minority, all of whom will help us deliver the services to the public more effectively and efficiently. We're looking for performance or improvements in various service delivery models. One of the examples is, and it's in our capital budget, but it will impact operating, is our HRMS system and the processes that support that system. We're looking at transforming the way we do business and making sure that each position actually adds value-added services. We continue to automate and innovate. We now have the ability to, and have had it for a while, to allow the public to do online reporting, and we've automated our paid duty management system. We're also working with the city in terms of shared services initiative, particularly in the areas of procurement and IT, and that's a project that we're doing with the TTC, library board, housing. It's right across the city, and I think there's some tremendous opportunities for savings as a result of that. As you all know, crime in the last 10 years has reduced significantly right across North America, a 27% reduction from 2005 to 2014. And then if you look at major crime indicators as of September 13th, or September 30th of this year compared to last year, Again, there is reductions in most areas, but shootings, as I said before, continues to be an area of concern. And if you look at the numbers, and they're only numbers on a page, but just to give you some idea of the activities that are behind those numbers. So 2 of those 38 homicides in 2015 were the result of the music shooting. And when you look at that incident, right, it impacted across the service. We had 133 calls come into our communications dispatch. They had to take those calls and they had to deal with them. In order to respond to the actual incident, we had 35 officers attend the scene, to secure the scene, to start the interview process, and basically to ensure that the public in that area was safe. And now we have an ongoing investigation that will hopefully bring the individuals that were responsible for those homicides to justice and to get them off the street. So it's just an example of a number that really has a lot of activity behind it right across the service, right from when the call comes in until hopefully we successfully investigate and the call. This is just a slide that shows our net budget since 2006, and you can see that our net budget has gone up by $263 million over the last 10 years. When you look at the reasons for that increase on this chart, 89% of that $263 million is the direct result of collective agreement impacts. The other 11% is related to other costs. And so if you look at the chart, we've actually in 2012 and 2013 and 2015, in terms of other costs, we actually saved and reduced our budgets by close to $45 million in order to meet certain budget targets, as well as keep the increase in the budgets as low as possible. But as I indicated before, of the 3.1 increase over that period of time, 2.7% of it was directly related to the collective agreement. The next chart shows the year-over-year inflation, and you can see that we're at 0.4%. The average inflation over that period of time based on the CPI was 1.7%, so we're well below the rate of inflation for other expenditures in those years. So we remain committed to finding as many efficiencies as possible to provide policing across the city in the most efficient and economical way. We've been working very hard on a number of initiatives that hopefully will allow us to achieve that goal. We've managed increases within and kept consistent levels, and despite inflation over that same period of 1.7%, we've actually been able to keep our rate of increase at 0.4%. And we've done that despite growing population in the City of Toronto, where based on the last census, increased by 4.5% from 2006 to 2011. So what have we done to actually try to mitigate some of the pressures? And I think it's important as we move to the 2016 budget request that we put it in the context of what we've done over the last 5 years to try to mitigate those pressures. It's really difficult to just look at 16 because there's work that's been done in other years that actually impact what we actually do in 16. So in those last 5 years, we've reduced our senior management positions by 10%, including a deputy chief position. That gained us $3 million. We reduced our premium pay by over $8 million. And our payroll costs from 2011 to 2015 are $21.4 million lower. So we've actually reduced our payroll costs in that period of time, sustainable savings of $30 million. As I indicated before, we have also reduced our non-collective, and a lot of that was done through not hiring to our approved establishment, but also very aggressively working with our vendors to keep their prices as low as possible. And those added up to about $40 million in savings in those years. We continue to strictly control non-salary increases, and as I said again, we saved about $1 million in non-salary costs through improved negotiations with vendors. We also participated in the city's caretaking initiative. About half of our facility footprint is currently outsourced to a vendor. The other half is done by internal city people, and we were able to save about $500,000 as a result of that. We work with the city and the TTC to come up with a benefit contract that saved all of us a lot of money. Our savings was $1.5 million in benefits administration. This is not necessarily a savings, but as a result of civilianizing the administration of the paid duty process, we're actually able to redeploy $2 million worth of officers back into the field doing what they should be doing, which is core policing services. And we also looked at the facilities, and we have a very much a strategy to get out of leased facilities. We're able to move out of our Parking East facility, and that saved us $600,000 net on an annual basis year over year. As I indicated before, we've reduced our payroll costs, and I think this shows it, both on the uniform and civilian side by $21 million, and I talked about the premium pay already. The loss of Tavis, we had a December class that was scheduled to have 41 recruits in it. Because 30 officers are actually funded by the Tavis grant, and we increased our establishment when we got that funding. Now that we've lost some of that money, we've actually had to reduce the 30. So our class of 41 in December that we're going to graduate in May is now down to 11. We continue to not be able to make the reserve contributions that are required to ensure that we are able to meet our future and current obligations with respect to sick pay gratuity, the replacement of our vehicles, our legal requirements. And so that's an issue that we continue to grapple with, and we're working with the city very closely on that. We've reduced in 16 our discretionary training. Training is what we call a zero base. People have to justify every year what they need. It's not based on what you had last year plus or minus 2%. They basically have to tell us where they want to go. We look at that and decide if there's any value to that, and then prepare a budget accordingly. We just recently were able to hedge some gasoline contracts that will probably be about, what, 3/4 of our volume. And we're able to save about $800,000 as a result of that hedging, so that's good news. And it's much in line with, and we've been working with the city to achieve that. As I indicated before, we've reduced our premium pay by $8.4 million during a period of time where we've also reduced our hiring quite significantly, where we're almost 350 below our approved establishment. And so this year, again, we flatlined our premium pay to keep those expenses as low as possible. And we've also, gapping of civilians. Gapping is the amount of money that we reduce our budget by because we know that we're not going to fill vacancies right away. We've increased that gapping level and achieved increased savings. And that is to mitigate the budget pressure, but it also allows us to do a review that we want to do with respect to the review of administrative support positions across the service to determine if, in fact, we can do business a little differently and perhaps reduce our establishment in that regard. So if we hired to our approved establishment in 2016, it would have cost us $28.9 million. And so that shows the avoidance, the first line there, of $30 million, including civilianization, of not hiring to our approved establishment, which was currently, in 15, it was 5462, now it's 5448. But we aren't able to actually hit 5462 right away, so the next piece there shows you that our June request reflects ramping up to 5462. If we had the funds that we needed, that's what we would do, but we wouldn't be able to get there in 16. It would probably take us to 17 to get there. So this one shows that our budget would have been $1.36 million. Because we revised our budget request to 5260, we were able to save $13 million in hiring expenses as a result of that. We also found about another $7 million in various other reductions, including reducing our reserve contribution by $3.5 million and reducing the December class, as indicated before, by $1.3 million. All that adds up to a $20 million reduction, almost $21 million since we started this process. Any process, the city issues guidelines, and so these are the guidelines that they were expected to achieve, and so you can see zero-based budgeting, incorporating all known and expected process improvement opportunities. The main thing that the target that the city provided, and it provided this target to all city departments, agencies, boards, and commissions, was a -1 budget over the 2015 approved budget, and part of that -1 was required us to find 2% inefficiencies. So when you look at civilian staffing, our current establishment is 2218. We continue to civilianize. We're civilianizing the 12 crossing guards administrative positions. We're civilianizing a diversity and inclusion analyst as well as an intelligence analyst. There was also 2 positions in finance and business management that we eliminated and saved about $250,000. So our new establishment on the civilian side of the house is 2230. And as I indicated before, we're actually gapping about almost 2% more than what we would normally do with respect to the civilian side. Civilians and administrative work in the service is slightly different than other organizations. Some of our civilians are actually operational people doing support for our front line. So court officers, station duty operators, and communications operators basically represent 43% of our civilian population. Then there's the indirect support that includes support to divisional investigative units, property and evidence. If you look at records management, 254 positions, that's a 24/7 operation that handles all occurrences and records across the service. So that represents another 47%. And then your typical, what I would call your typical admin, is about 10% of our budget, covering finance, HR, and other administrative functions. So that adds up to 2230. This chart is intended to show you where we've come from. So in 2004, you could see the dark line is our approved establishment. The green is where we're actually funding. And so you could see in 2004, we were very close to funding, where gapping was around 4.9%. There wasn't that much of a gap between what our approved establishment was on the civilian side and the number of people that we actually had in those chairs. As you can see, as you move forward, and especially in 2012, 13 and onwards, that gap is getting bigger and bigger. And so our ability now to continue to provide important administrative support to the service is somewhat compromised. It does, keep me up at night in terms of errors and other things that might occur that we don't want to have happen. So that's something that we are keeping our eye on, but you can see we're nowhere near budgeting to where our approved establishment is, and some of that is deliberate because, as I indicated before, we are going to be doing a review that will look at all of the administrative support positions. On the uniform side, our average deployment now, when you take into account the 30 that we eliminated because of the loss of Tavis, the 14 that we reduced because of civilianization, we're actually down in average deployment from 5260 to 5235 in 2016. Our budget is based on the fact that we think we're going to lose about 150 people on the uniform side in 2016. And you can see that our planned uniform hiring now totals about 146 positions in 2016. Part of the uniform staffing and part of the cost that we are obligated to pay as part of the collective agreement is reclassifications. There's civilianizations that are now annualized. It also includes paid duty earnings, which are offset now by revenues. If you look at now the next chart, again, the dark line is our approved establishment. And so you can see when there was a grant that we got in 2003, that actually we started getting the money in 2006 from the province. You see we were trying to build up in 2006 to our approved strength of 5510. We finally got there in 2007 and 8, and you'll see that our budgets actually reflected that. The ramping up actually resulted in a lot of higher costs because of that and higher budgets. And then you could see we got all the way up to 5604, and we were actually operating at 2010 and 2011 very close to 5600, which is our approved establishment. Then 2012 hit, and you can see now the gap between what our approved establishment is and what we're actually being staffed at. And you can see the gap has gotten bigger. It was the biggest in 2014, when we were down to an approved or an actual deployment of 5232. And it's going to continue to stay that in the foreseeable future. But you can see there's a big gap between what our approved establishment was, what we were actually providing service at, and now. So we're actually providing hopefully the same level of service with evolving crime trends and nature of crime, but with a lot fewer people. And so what this chart shows, and it's just another, the red is the approved, the blue is the average deployment that we budget at. We do not budget at approved establishment. We budget based on how many people are here, how many people are going to leave, how many people are going to hire, how many paychecks we basically have to issue. And so you can see in 2012-13, the cost that we avoided as a result of not hiring to the approved establishment, ranges from 21.5 million to 2012 all the way up to 35 million in 2014. Those are costs that we could have budgeted for, but because of budget pressures and other reasons, we didn't in order to meet certain targets. So basically, our average deployment officers have gone down by 380 officers since 2010. Some of that, though, 156 of it, was the result of civilianization, where we actually reduced our uniform deployment because a civilian person was now doing the job of that uniform officer. So you have to take that into account. But we're still down about 213 from our approved establishment. So what's our request? Right now, we're looking at a request, including the salary settlement, of 3.69%. 2.1, or almost 2.2 of that, is directly related to collective agreement obligations and benefits that we basically have to meet. And so just a quick take through this. Our actual salaries and premium pay, the incremental contribution is about $4 million. A lot of that has to do with annualization of reclassifications. That's where officers move up from PC 4 to 3 to 2. Those happen at various times during the year. In 2015, the 4.5 is the annualization of those costs. The leap year is a one-time. It'll come off the budget next year. We've changed our gapping estimate, and so that's reflected here. The premium pay reduction is $400,000. That's as a result of POA. So we've reduced our expenditures here. They've reduced their reimbursement. For us, it's a wash. For the city, it's a saving of $400,000. One of the biggest challenges that we face right now, and it's a trend that started in 2015 and seems to be continuing into 2016, is benefits. These are employee benefits and statutory deductions, but mostly employee benefits that we have to pay to our people. And so we're seeing an upward trend, and you can see $4.1 million in medical, dental, and admin fees. That's half a point, pretty well, almost more than half a point on our increase. So it's something that we are now working with our benefit administrator on to at least understand what's driving those increases, and then working with them and the board to see if there's anything that we can do to actually mitigate some of those increases. So the stuff I just talked about represents about 89% of the budget. The remaining 11% is split between other expenditures, which is $85 million, and reserve contributions, which are $40 million. So on an annual basis, in this year, our reserve contributions are about $40 million. And that's to meet our sick pay gratuity obligations. It's to meet our obligations with respect to replacing our vehicle and information technology, our healthcare spending account, which is a board negotiated account that we have to now fund, and legal services that we also need monies for. Ideally, we should have contributed $5.6 million more in contributions in 2016, but because of the budget pressures, we decided to cut that back to $2.1 million. So we saved an additional $3.5 million as a result of that reduction. The other expenditures, you'll see there's some ups, but there's also a lot of downs. So legal costs is an ongoing pressure, and that we're trying to deal with, and the board has taken some actions to try to mitigate some of that. Computer maintenance, as we increased the amount of equipment that we have with the addition of various systems, whether they be in-car camera or into new Versadex, our maintenance costs go up because you got more equipment. Now, we are taking steps to virtualize our servers. We are starting the step of looking at cloud to see if there's anything that we can do in that regard. But even cloud is just another fancy term for external hardware provider. And so when we do move in that direction, we want to move in that direction, not looking only at the short term, but also the longer term in terms of what those costs might be into the future. We've also made some strides, though, in reducing some of our costs. As indicated before, we were able to hedge a good chunk of our 16 consumption, which saved incrementally $400,000. Because of the introduction of VoIP a couple of years ago, we've been able to save $500,000, and this is incrementally, with respect to our telephone charges. And our computer hardware and software, we're able to get a $600,000 reduction in that area as well. Revenues, two things. The first thing is that the province continues to fund the upload of court services. And so I think it started in 2007, no, it can't be 2011, where the province basically would upload and reimburse us for court security costs, or subsidize us, up to an amount of $45 million. With the $7 million that we're anticipating in 2016, we'll be up to $32 million. In 3 years, we'll be up to the full 45. So that's additional incremental revenue that we're getting in 2016. The other side of the coin is the fact that we've been advised that we will be losing our TAVIS funding. This is funding that we've had since 2006. It's totaled probably close to $47 million during that period of time. And so the loss of that funding basically adds half a point to our increase in 2016. The recovery from Pan Am, those are monies that we budgeted as a result of the planning. It's a one-time reduction. We actually budgeted for the revenue. We're not going to get the revenue in 2016, so it creates a pressure. That will not be there in the future. This is just a breakdown of the revenues line. And so one of the things is EMS, as part of shared services, does buy gas, not buy it, but gets gas at our pumps. The fact now that we're able to hedge some of that gasoline consumption will hopefully pass on some benefit to EMS as well. We talked about the provincial grants, there's user fees. All of that adds up to $122 million, and it reduces the amount that we require from the property tax base. And this is just another way of showing the 122.6 million. As you can see, recoveries, almost 25 million of that is our paid duty that we pay to our officers, which we then recover 25 million, plus an admin fee from the people that actually order those paid duty services. So TAVIS. So as I indicated before, from 2006 to 2015, we've received about $5 million a year. This was supposed to be secured funding based on an announcement from then Premier Dalton McGuinty in 2012. We've now been advised that we will get the funding for the end of this year, but we don't anticipate any funding in 2016 and onwards. The board chair has requested clarification from the minister in terms of, we need some clarity around just the level of funding that we're going to get from the province, right? Because it's hard to build a budget without it. So those are ongoing discussions that are occurring. And so TAVIS is a program which is, to a large extent, subsidized by the $5 million that we got from the province. The service also has certain expenditures that we've incurred as a result. So it funded premium pay that we would give back to divisions who gave up officers for the rapid response teams. As I indicated before, it funded 30 school resource officers, and it also helped pay for certain operational costs related to the actual TAVIS program. In order to maintain almost $16 million in grants, there's two grants. There's the Safer Communities, which came into effect in 2003. And for that one there, we're required to maintain a uniform establishment of 5510 to get $35,000 per officer, 250 officers. So if you fall below that threshold of 5510, then you start losing, for every person that goes down below that, we start losing $35,000. That has cost us, including 2016, $3.1 million, because we're not at the 5510 that we need to be at. The other one is the one that came into effect in 1998, the CPP grant, which gave us $30,000 per officer. The threshold for that is 5180. So how do we compare to the city target? Basically, our adjusted approved budget was 79.7. The non-collective agreement added 14.9. The salary impact, another 21.2. So basically, we came in with a request today of 1.015 billion, which is 3.7% over 2015. The city target required us to be 1% below the 979, which equates to 969. So in order to meet the city target, we basically have to find $46 million. We like to look at budgets beyond just 1 year, and so the senior officer contract has not been reflected, because we don't know what the results of that are, in our 2016 budget, and certainly not in the 17 or 18 outlooks either. But right now, we're anticipating, and I don't think this will change a lot, a pressure of 2.4% in 2017 and 2.4% in 2018, and that includes the impact of the collective agreement. So we are going in the right direction. So the bottom line, we haven't hit the city's target of -1%, and quite frankly, that's going to be a very difficult target to achieve. If you look at what we've put in front of you today, we've got a salary, a budget, both uniform and civilian, which is operating well below the approved establishment and has been doing so now for the last 4 years, and but still providing the same level of service. Along with that, we've reduced our premium pay by $8 million, again, during a period of time when we've been up to 350 officers below our approved strength. So there's not a lot of room without some transformational change on that side of the house. Reserves, we've been grappling with this for probably the last 10 years in terms of making sure that our reserves actually meet our obligations, but we've taken other steps. We've looked at what's in those reserves. We've extended the life cycle of our assets as much as possible, both on the vehicle side as well as on the technology equipment side. We've asked ourselves, number one, do we even need that equipment? Can we do it differently? Where we do need it, we've tried to extend it and tried to keep those reserve contributions and the draws as low as possible. For the stuff that's in there, we go through a competitive process to ensure that the prices that we do get are as low as possible. So we've done everything that we can, and we're still looking to see if we can reduce the actual obligations that come out of that reserve. And then other expenditures, when you look at, which is 85 million is left over. 20 million of that is to clean and keep the lights on in our facilities. That's from the City of Toronto. We have a strategy in our capital program where we sincerely want to reduce our facility footprint, which will then reduce those overheads. It will reduce the custodial services, it will reduce our utilities, it will reduce other administrative overheads that exist in those facilities. So we're taking other steps to try to reduce our other expenditures. You've got $10 million, $9 million in gas. You've got $13 million in collective agreement-related expenditures that we're obligated to pay because of what it says in the collective agreement. So now it leaves you with about $45 million of other expenditures that large organizations have. We are still looking. This is a very fluid process. This is the first step, really, in terms of, I mean, we've gone through the board budget subcommittee. The budget is before you today. There's a lot of work that remains to be done. We continue to look at our budget, and we will take any further reductions where they're possible. We will continue to work with the city to, again, see if we can come up with further reductions. And so this is all a process towards February when the budget actually gets approved by the city. And that's my presentation on the operating budget. I'd be happy to answer any questions, or we would be happy to answer
Why
any
don't we,
questions.
before we get into the capital and the parking, just go around and get board members' discussion here. Auditorium, did you?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for that presentation and for all the hard work that you and your colleagues, including some of our colleagues here in particular who've drew the short straw and got on the budget subcommittee, Councillors Carroll and Lee, and I think also yourself, you were there, yeah. So thank you very much for that. And I just want to sort of, I guess, give you notice of the fact that I will be at the end of, at the appropriate time, moving a motion that that is meant to provide you with the opportunity to continue with this fine work and not approve the budget today, because I think we need more of the kind of progress that you demonstrated from the beginning of the process to where we are today, which you quite properly described as not being the end. First of all, I'd just like to ask you, in the context of the deployment, I mean, because obviously a good part of the increase in cost is attributable, as you said, a number of times on the way through, the cost of salaries, both civilian and uniformed. Could you help us, because I think it might be for the benefit of all the people in the room who don't have access to some of the stuff that we see. You would have thought from looking at the crime stats that the top categories of calls leading to a dispatch would be, you'd say, assault and break and enter and robbery, based on the numbers that you put up in the chart earlier on. But in fact, is that true? I mean, when you sort of see uniformed officers being deployed in cars, sometimes two at a time, what would be the top areas that they'd be deployed to look into?
So we do look at the data to determine what is the demand on our services. Assaults and break-and-enters in progress do require 2 officers because there's a very likelihood we're going to encounter suspects or have to make arrests. But we look at whether or not we're receiving a call just for report purposes. And then, of course, we might not even send a police officer. It might be one of those situations where we take a report over there online, or use what we have as our alternative response. So we do examine the data to determine our deployment needs. That gets reflected in the size of some of our units. Some divisions might not yet. The number of recruits, for example, that they got in previous years because the circumstances and the demand on the unit has changed over the time. So we do take that
I guess
into
I was,
consideration.
Deputy, I was going at a slightly different point, which is, and it's sympathetic to some extent to the point that Tony made in the budget presentation, which is there's only so much you can do with the gasoline account and the paper and the paperclip account. And really it's about deployment of police officers. And I think I'm right in saying from other data we've seen that, in fact, some of the top categories of calls that often lead to a dispatch are to do with things like noise complaints and parking complaints and things like that take up a huge portion of the time of police officers, contrary to what you might think from this report that would suggest, just based on the crimes that we see, real, I'll call them real crimes. Am I right in that?
Thank you, yeah. I might have missed your point. Yeah, the majority of our work is in community service rather than crime response or crime investigation. That's just a natural experience right across policing, right across the country. So indeed, we are often providing social interventions in the form of, as you just described, there might be a noise complaint, it might be a neighbor dispute, might be just a person who's called for service. The difficulty, of course, is we might arrive on the scene and realize that there actually is a crime to be investigated. A noise complaint might have led to a neighbor dispute, which might have led to an assault. So we often are trying as well as we can at the time we receive the call to determine the resource needs that we're going to dispatch. And in many occasions, as you well know, we are part of a tri-service response. We might in fact refer the call to EMS or to fire and not have to send a police officer at all. And again, when we look at the financial impact that has, we're looking at whether or not we should continue. So the board will recall from 2012 through 2013, the Chiefs Organizational Review looked at whether or not we should be responding to historically the calls that we receive. So a couple of examples, we've reduced the number of times we have to respond to alarm calls by notifying the alarm subscriber that the next false alarm is going to result in a reduction of police service because you're not maintaining your system appropriately. We no longer respond to lost passports, which previously required a police officer to attend. So we make those kinds of adjustments, and they'll get reflected in our calculations on what resources we need. This is a constant evaluation of the resource demands that are placed upon our service that we hope gets reflected in the budget.
I have a number of other granular kind of questions, but I'm not going to ask them today. I don't think it's the right time to go through a list of things that some of which you're familiar with. And I think my motion will suggest that we take that time over the next little while, notwithstanding that I know you're driven on what you've been doing and all of you by the city's own timetable, but I think we have enough latitude in there to do some more work on some of these areas. So I'll stop there and I'll move my motion at the appropriate time, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Muller?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Veneziano. Thank you, Ms. Calaferti. I really appreciate how clearly this is laid out. I wasn't part of the budget subcommittee this year, but I was able to follow, and I really appreciated that. My question is probably about whether or not it is appropriate for me to compare the following apples and oranges. I'm going to refer you to 2 pages. And it's about the salary. It's essentially, this is the salary or pupil budget. So if you look at page 8, which has the reference to the decrease in crime since 2005. And it would suggest that between 2005 and 2014, the overall reduction is 27%. And so that's an apple. And is the following an apple or an orange? Going to the page that has the uniform establishment chart deployment history. I think it's 27. Yes, page 27, which shows in 2005, just to use the same time frame, the average deployed, not the established, the average deployed of 5,229 for 2005, and then for 2014, 5,232. So I'm asking myself the question, 27% reduction in overall crime, and therefore one would think it would have an effect. And perhaps this is a question for you, Deputy Chief Federico, or Acting Chief. And then same amount of people, more or less, over 10. Is there a correlation, and is that something that we should be paying attention to? The point being that there's the same number of officers 10 years later and a 27% reduction in crime, more or less. I'm not quibbling around the specific number of FTEs we're talking about.
So I'm glad you acknowledge that there's an apples and orange kind of discussion here, because as I just indicated to the mayor, the majority of our responses initially deal with a non-criminal event. And often we do try and decriminalize events even when we do attend. And so drawing a direct correlation between the crime rate and the number of police officers can often be misleading. We respond to so much more than just crime in progress. The other point I'd make is that at the end of the year, we can usually total up the events and get an indication of whether or not crime rose or fell over a long period of time. But in the middle of the year, it's very difficult to know, and so we're responding to events as they transpire. So an event over the weekend, the CAO referred to the MUSAC, that consumed dozens and dozens of police resources. So the number of officers is often determined by the demands across the broad spectrum of activity. And that also includes anticipated self-generated activity like Highway Traffic Act enforcement or some of our organized crime investigations, which are, we're not waiting for a crime to occur, we're trying to break up organized crimes, which are self-initiated activities. So, but at the same time, we are looking at this data, and that's why it's part of a budget presentation to see if, in fact, there are direct impacts on budget decisions. But it's difficult to take one particular component and say, aha, as a result of that, you're able to maintain a certain level of community service because you're experiencing some either increase or decrease in a particular data. So school resource officers is a good example. They're not in the schools because crime's happening in the schools. They're in the schools because there's an investment to be made. And so we're dedicating police resources to activities that aren't directly related to a response to crime. Whereas the crime indicators, these are events that have happened that have prompted a police response or an investigation, rather than, the classic, how much can you quantify in terms of prevention as opposed to reaction. But I think we all take your point that there's a correlation between the resources and the funding and the demands on our service.
There will also be, presumably over that decade period of time, an increase in the population served, for which you've got the same number of officers.
Well, so thank you for that. So 4.5% increase in the population, plus a redistribution of the population. We had a discussion earlier about the makeup of the population in this downtown area. It's increasingly becoming residential. That places different demands on a police service, a police station that was dedicated to retail, commerce, business, and special events. So our police officers now need to be handling residential types of events and occurrences, and that may require additional officers. It might require, additional skills. In other words, we're making resources, and as the demands increase in 52 Division, that doesn't necessarily mean they're decreasing up in 31 Division or 14 Division. In fact, we've shown data where, our enforcement activity just around parking tags as an indicator are increasing in 14 Division. That can be attributed to the expansion of the entertainment district. Well, that's human resources. The service has to invest in that area in order to control parking, if parking is considered an important priority.
I'd just add that the type of crime, so now we're facing cybercrime, which, maybe 10 years ago or even maybe 5 years ago didn't exist to the same extent. So it's a different type of crime that requires resources and equipment to be able to deal with. Now, I'm not suggesting for a minute that there's a direct correlation. So that is another, and there's risk management, right, in terms of terrorism and those types of activities that we want to make sure that we are aware of and take action on. So all of those require resources that you don't necessarily see on the street, but are working to try to keep the city safe.
Other questions? Councillor Carroll?
So slide 6, the service challenges and opportunities, there's a statement still recovering from the civilian hiring freeze. So I'm concerned, what does recovery mean? Is there an expectation that we're going to suddenly stop gapping and all these positions will be filled? What does recovery mean? And then I'm going to go to slide 12 and further unpack that.
So again, there's multiple parts to that question. So one answer is that we will evaluate the decision to gap at the rate we're doing in light of the need for civilian members to fulfill certain purposes. So I use one small example from a command that I previously held, and the board's quite familiar with, managing the number of requests for police clearance letters or records checks. Huge pressure on the service because we keep seeing increases. When we had the civilian hiring freeze, we literally were not able to staff up to the demand. So there's examples like that. But at the same time, as we look at the overall civilian component, we've made a decision to try and review as many of those positions as possible in order to determine whether they're all needed in light of some advancements in perhaps technology or business processes. So one small example of the impact of the hiring freeze is an inability to meet a deadline imposed by either legislation or community expectations. And the second is that the gapping is discretionary, and we've chosen in the interest of achieving maximum savings, extending the gapping period. And it's also tempered a bit by our experience that we can seem to tolerate that at this point, that gapping period, as opposed to a shorter one.
Right, and that's why I'm concerned, because on other pages, we're using gapping between this 2230. You've got a higher rate of gapping in there in order to balance the budget. So there's not really any recovery going on. We're continuing to gap those positions. So is there an expectation in the service that those positions are going to come flooding back? Or is there any discussion of the fact that rather than gapping, we may simply be reorganizing to work in the complement that we do actually deploy currently?
I would suggest that, and you're right, I mean, recovery kind of implies that we're going to get back to 4.9% in gapping, right? We're being much more selective, and we're managing the vacancies and only moving forward on those that are mission critical, and that there's a risk associated or a service problem associated with not moving on those positions. So we will move on those positions, but there's other positions that, quite frankly, we will look at and say we will either fill temporarily or not at all until we review the actual need for those positions.
So if I look at this, it's on slide 25, the civilian establishment, it actually ends before we get to 2016. So in actual numbers, where are we going to be in this chart? If you're asking us to adopt a composition of 2230, that's one thing, but in order to balance the budget, what is the actual complement likely to be this year?
Right now, we're at 240 in vacancies, so we're probably going to be about 12% below.
240. Okay, so it would be helpful to have that number stated somewhere in the budget, because we have a pro forma here that looks at 2230, but there's nowhere here in the simple slide that it looks at, does that represent an overall increase in the number of positions or not?
I don't see, to maybe answer your question, if you could look, if you were able to extrapolate to 2230, the gap that exists in 2015 will more than likely be the same in 2016. So you're not going to see it go down, let's put it that way, where we're filling more positions. We'll probably be able to fill at the same rate that we're currently filling. I don't know if that answers your question, but...
So the 1978, the actual civilian FTE on the job is what in relation to 1978? What's it actually going to be in 2016, in all likelihood?
Probably 12, another 12, so 1990.
Okay. Another 12 positions. Okay. So if I can go back then, sorry to plod through this, Mr. Chair, but if I can go back to slide number 12, and we're looking at year-over-year percentage change, 07 to 16, and then we look at the year-over-year, what the actual rate of inflation was, where we see collective agreement and then we see other, in the line that says collective agreement, because of the way things are organized here, and we were discussing this earlier too, according to the PSA, that really includes compensation as a whole, does it not? Because everyone is organized into, if not the police association, some other association. So that just so that the public looking at this doesn't get the misunderstanding that represents people in uniform and nothing else. That actually represents everybody right up to yourselves.
Correct.
Okay. I just wanted to make that clear. So then, what then is the other? What the other percentage increase in the couple of times that it has actually gone down? What sort of expenditure increases are those? Because those are not human increases.
If you look at, so you're talking about the other?
Yes,
That's
you have
hiring.
collective agreement and other, sometimes it's 1.7, sometimes it's 1.3, sometimes in the big year, it went down 2.6. That's
So if you look at Appendix C, but I can speak to it in the report on page 31. So the other is made up of vendor-related...
the report.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not going to fish
So it's
through it.
vendor-related expenditures plus
Okay.
hiring. The reduction, the fact that we're not hiring to the approved establishment and how much we're hiring less than the previous year is also reflected. So as an example...
So that would affect, for instance, the years where other went down.
Yeah, so as an example, in 2012, the other was $18 million below the line, so we saved $18 million. 9.4 of that was a result of non-hiring. The rest was other expenditures that we were able to reduce, which would include reserve contributions, not making them, that sort of thing. And then if you look at 2013, there was $10 million reduction in hiring and $14.8 million reduction in other. So that gives you an idea of how we then were able to achieve certain targets.
Okay. And then I'm having trouble reconciling it to the next page where it says Toronto Police Service, other budget increases fall well below the annual rate. So I'm looking at, okay, so the increases here, they don't always line up. I'm having trouble reconciling this chart.
The point there, very simply, was that the rate of inflation during the last 2 years, based on the CPI, averaged about 1.7%. When you look at what our other average during that same period of time, which was 0.4, and if you add the hiring impact, probably, let's say, 0.8 or 0.9, it's still well below the rate of inflation. So the other, a lot of the other includes gasoline, and other expenditures that are market-related.
Okay, I may still not be understanding it then, because the deputy chief just pointed something. When you say other, what line are you on? Am I supposed to go back and forth here?
When we
Okay.
talk, when it's related to the previous slide,
Right.
right? And so the other, in ours, is the other expenditures that includes the non-hiring and...
So I got to go back to, I go back to this page.
Yes.
Okay. So tell me about these, what are these, where I see CPI, and that's the index amount they put in. Where it says increase and then total percent increase,
So
where
what slide?
are those numbers coming from?
Which slide are you on now?
I'm trying to go back and forth between the two because you told me to, but I don't understand. In page number 3, in page 13. Oh, that's the one you've got on the air.
Yes.
Right.
So what is that? The line that goes across that says increase. How do I relate that back to page 12?
That's just the difference
Increase of
between
what?
2000 and the CPI in 2008 to 2009 went from 111 to 114, which is a 2.6% index increase, which represents a 2.3% increase. So one is, this slide is way too busy. One is showing the actual difference in the index. The other, the line below shows the difference between years in terms of the percentage increase.
Okay, I'm having trouble making it make your case. I'm sorry to belabor this, but I got to go away because I'm going to be doomed to more meetings.
We have lots of time.
So we have the CPA raw number there, which leads to that, where the line that says increase, is that CPA, CPI?
So
2.4?
CPI across the top is simply the index, right,
Right,
of a basket of goods.
right.
The increase, 7/8, is shown on, so if you look at 2007.
I see tell me what,
So
where it
the
says
2.6
2.4, what does that mean? No, look at
2.4
2007.
would have been the difference between the index. So the index in 2006, it's not on here, would have been 2.4 less than 111.5. So,
Okay,
right,
so what does total percent increase mean?
The percent increase is year-over-year percentage increase. So 2.6, which is the increase in the index, right? If you take that over 111.5, it's a 2.3% increase. Most people talk in those terms. So it's really the bottom line that you should pay attention to.
Right.
So in other words, the 2.6 over the 111.5 is 2.3%.
Okay, then you and I will talk about
Yes.
this offline. If that's what those mean, I'm not sure it makes in many of the years on slide 12, I'm not sure it makes the case you wanted to make. Because they're two different types of measurements, but I'm going to go away and look at it now
Okay.
that I know that I'm using the same definition. And since it sounds like we're going to have another meeting, we'll chat.
For sure.
Yeah. Because I think it's fine to look at the total average at the end, at the very end, and that's a compelling case. But year over year, if it's a minority number of years, if we're down to really, there are only 2 or 3 years where you really were cutting deeper than CPI, then it's hard to make that case because it means that individually, year by year by year, we were still making economic factor adjustments for you and correcting the problem that you would have had. It's hard to use the total average, but I'll talk to you about it and we'll duke it out.
Other questions? Tony, you indicated that you are still, yep, go ahead, Shelley.
Sorry, I did have one other one, and that's on slide 23, which is the changeover of the crossing guard unit. So the crossing guard unit is civilianizing?
Yes, we actually sent it to the city to see if they could do it cheaper, the transportation. They basically wrote back, said, you already have the infrastructure in place, it's going to cost us more. So we
Right.
now moved it back into our budget. But rather than have uniform officers doing that administration, we'll have civilians doing that administration at a much lesser cost.
Okay, so much less cost, but it's the same number of bodies?
Actually, you mean between uniform and civilians?
Right.
There were 16, I think, uniforms, and we're going down to 12 civilians.
That's the question. That's that piece I'm always looking for. At the same time, we're civilianizing. Sometimes officers, while they did have charge of that unit, they might be doing other things.
Yes,
So
that's
I'm
an
always
FTE.
cognizant of did somebody check to see if that's the number of people you need as you civilianize it? Because if they don't have those extra duties, it's not always
Yes.
the case. Okay. So it changed to 12, but it also changed from a 16-person unit to a 12.
Yes.
Okay,
Well,
thank you.
16 FTE unit to a 12, because like you said,
Right.
some of it was just one part of many things that they did.
Yes, okay.
Tony, you indicated you were still working on looking at a number of things. You've met with the city a couple of times, is that correct?
That's correct.
And what are the types of things that you're still working on? Because you finished off your presentation, which I agree was very thorough, but was saying there are still a number of things you're working on. What are some of those things? And
So there's basically, I'd say, four main things. As we move on in the year and we get much more, I guess, accurate information with respect to our projected actuals, we're going to be looking at some key accounts to see if, in fact, there's any opportunity to reduce those accounts based on more up-to-date information. And that's a process that we're going through, and we'll come back with any further adjustments that result from that process. The other thing, and I hate to say this, and because I keep saying it every year that we shouldn't be doing it, but we're going to have to look very carefully at the reserve contributions and basically working with the city, coming up with a strategy that will help us perhaps reduce those contributions, but perhaps find other means in terms of actually being able to meet our obligations in that regard. And that will include a further review of our reserve obligations and tightening that up as much as possible. I think we also have to look at, and I don't know if we can look at this, but I just want the board to be aware. Right now, if we're just replacing those that leave, and in fact, our average deployment is going to be less. If the board says, well, how about if you, or somebody said, if let's say you didn't hire at all, you don't replace anybody, we're basically saving $700,000 net because you lose the grant money for those 146 positions, 35,000 each. So that's, to me, and I think the chief now then would have to weigh in terms of adequate and effective and his ability. I mean, we're doing our best at 5260. Going down further would really compromise us. And the other thing is premium pay. We'll look at that to see if there's any further reductions we might be able to achieve in that area.
board members have any other questions? Mayor, you had a motion you wanted to put?
I did draft a motion, which maybe we can put up. Yeah, thank you. And I don't know if I've got this quite right, but, oh, there's a paper version, yeah. Yep. So it says that the board not approve the proposed Toronto Police Service operating budget request for 2016 and direct that the chief and the Toronto Police Service staff seek to identify additional reductions and efficiencies in the proposed operating budget, that the chief, together with the chair of the board and the mayor, attempt to achieve adjustments to currently proposed provincial funding changes, that the chief and the Toronto Police Service staff seek to identify additional upward adjustments to revenue estimates contained in the proposed operating budget, and that the chief and TPS staff consult with city staff in carrying out items 1 to 3 above, really just to see if they have any ideas. And finally, that a revised operating budget proposal be presented to the board for approval at its November 12th, 2015 meeting. And I'm led to believe this would, probably with some complaining, be within the constraints that the city's budget process faces.
So that's good, because this is a walk-on item, which we didn't want to do, but it was driven by the fact that we believe the city needed it sooner. So if we've got that time frame, that
Well, as I said,
allows
not
us
without
to.
some complaining, but I had some calls made, and they said there might be some complaints, but
Thank you.
I'll deal with those.
Discussion. Councillor Lee.
Just one question. Can we direct the mayor? I think we can direct the chair of the board, right? But can we direct the mayor as well? Just a technical point. Number two, yes.
What's that? Do we get to direct the mayor to do
Yes.
something?
We are requesting that we direct the
Doesn't
mayor
everybody?
to attempt to achieve
I don't view this as anything
just a
to do at all.
technicality.
Well, we can direct the budget subcommittee.
Yes, I suggest that, you can work with the mayor.
Yeah, okay.
Direct the chair, working with the mayor to attempt to.
That's fine. Working with the mayor to attempt to achieve. I'll take that as a friendly amendment. Take that as a friendly amendment.
Is everybody comfortable with that?
There's no pride of authorship in it, I just,
No, that's, Tony, that gives us time to have another couple of budget subcommittee meetings and hammer away at this.
Well, as I indicated, this is a fluid process. It hasn't, we're not done. And so there's other, other checkpoints that we have to go with the city. So I think delaying it, I don't think, if actually allows us to do a little bit more work, that hopefully we can come back with some other ideas.
Councillor Carroll, you're comfortable with that?
Yes, I thought it was the week after that. November 12th, I don't think is that onerous. It's going to be tricky to meet the print. But all it means is that we might be in a situation where... All it means is we might be in a situation where the day we launch the budget, the binder and analyst notes for the police board is a scramble to print. But November 12th certainly gives the CFO time to process it into his spreadsheet, et cetera. Yeah.
And so the suggestion is that in one, that we talk about that the chief seek to identify additional, and it's really the chief. It obviously goes with his staff that he will work with, but it's redundant. And then two, we would put up, yeah, the chief seek to identify, exactly. And again on four, yeah. Okay, is everybody comfortable? Can we go back to 1 and 2? Yeah. Murray?
This may be because I haven't worked enough in the private sector, but number 3, the reference to upward adjustments, I just want to make sure that we all understand what that means.
Increases?
I just wasn't looking for any downward adjustments.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if it's downward adjustments, they should keep it to themselves. If it's upward, increases in revenue. But I mean,
That the chiefs seek to identify, so it would be additional,
Further
You can call it
increases, why don't we
increases if you
just say
want.
increases in revenue? That way we clarify it entirely. Okay, is everybody comfortable now with the 5-point motion? Moved by Mayor Tory, seconded by Councillor Carroll. All in favor? Okay, thank you. Yes, I will also receive the correspondence, which is your walk-on attachment from the Police Accountability Coalition. So, Tony, continue on the Capitol.
Yeah, so that's report number 22, I think, on your agenda. I'm going to turn it over to Sandra. Can we start then, since it's the next one up? We'll start with 22 with your indulgence and then move to 21. Turn it over to Sandra. Just some very brief introductory comments. As much as this is our capital program, bricks and mortar, large technology projects, there are, and we, the city debt funds and we pay stuff through reserves and development charges. We always want to keep in mind that some of the strategies that we identify on our capital actually have impacts on our operating. And I think Sandra will give you some examples of that. So, Sandra?
Thank you, and good afternoon. So just to start off with the strategic direction of our program is actually very strategic in nature. So aside from keeping our policing facilities safe, accessible to the public, and in a state of good repair, we're actually going to be focusing on critical financial, HR, communications, and operational systems, and the equipment and infrastructure that's associated with that equipment, in order to maintain it to the most up-to-date version to ensure that we have vendor support, but to also look for opportunities for automation as well as improve efficiencies and provide better information for decision-making purposes. As Tony mentioned in the operating presentation, what's key for us is funding our reserves to continue to allow where we life cycle our equipment that's used for operational reasons, is to make sure that we keep those reserves in a positive balance so we continue to have that funding source available to us. So as far as 2015 is concerned, we had a couple of major accomplishments. We completed our parking east and headquarters relocation. So we had some construction deficiencies that we needed to work on with that location. That was completed this year, and that project came in at $1.4 million below budget, as well as the work that was continuing on our IRIS project, which is our Versadex and eJust operational system. We continued system stabilization. This is a large system that's used throughout the organization. And we also had business intelligence and reporting tools that were developed over the last year, so that we now have full implementation of this system. And that system was delivered at $3.3 million below budget. So the city actually provides us with our 2016 to 2025 targets. The city asks for a firm 10-year plan with debt targets being met in each of the 10 years, and they ask us to optimize development charges as a source of funding. Any new projects, we would require approval of the board as well as the city manager. So the key objectives of our program is to make investments that support operations that allow for optimized service delivery, and that's both internally and externally, as well as creating efficiencies by either reducing our footprint, lowering staff and infrastructure costs, and reducing the amount of time that it takes to pull information together so that we can make effective decisions. So as a result, we're actually taking a different approach this year to our facility renovation and replacement and system upgrades, where we're taking a more strategic view of the changing landscape, both with internal services as well as the changing police demographics. So for this reason, our capital program contains ongoing projects along with facility and equipment replacements that follow the current or the services previous replacement and renovation decisions. But what we'll be doing this year is we're going to be performing a full review of the current facility replacement and renovation strategy. So we want to be more strategic in terms of addressing the decisions that we've made for replacements and renovations, and do that in light of the changing landscape as well as sustainability in police services, and let that drive the decisions. Or more clearly drive the decisions. We're also going to be reviewing the number of vehicles and radios that are required for police operations. And we'll continue to work very closely with the city to coordinate projects and associated spending. So the goal will be to gain efficiencies between the work that we do and what the city does for us. So some of our key challenges for 2016 will be securing funds for possible future projects such as body-worn cameras or next generation 911, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the presentation, or what those two projects are, as well as the sustainability of the vehicle and equipment reserve. That reserve is at risk. It relies on contributions from the operating budget, which have not been keeping pace with the draws. And as Tony mentioned, we do work very closely with our asset custodians to look at whether or not we need the equipment that we eventually life cycle, to stretch the life of that equipment as far as we possibly can, ensuring that it continues to be safely used and operational within the organization. But there is a limit that you reach for that. And we're also looking at reducing our footprint and associated costs, but we have to balance that with optimal service delivery, as well as meeting citizen expectations regarding that service delivery. So our 2016 funding request, that's comprised of total ongoing projects as well as projects that are beginning in 2016 that are funded from debt, and vehicle and equipment reserve life cycle projects, totals $42.8 million. Funding is obtained from the vehicle and equipment reserve as well as developmental charges, and that totals about $18.5 million. So our total request is $24.2 million. That's debt to be debt funded. The city's target for us was $31.4 million, so we're actually coming in $7.1 million below target this year. And as I pointed out earlier, we're planning a to maintain the life cycle, we need to make a $16.7 million draw from the vehicle and equipment reserve. And that will put the reserve in a deficiency position by 2018. We do need to keep that in mind. Could you go back to the summary? Oh, way back. Back one more, right there, thank you. Okay, so what you have before you is a list of some of our ongoing projects that will continue to be worked on in 2016, as well as, and have some draws or as far as 2016 funds are concerned. There's 3 facilities projects, and the major endeavor that we're going to make this year with facilities, as I mentioned, is to look at the logistics of the facilities work and really align that with what the business requirements will be in the future, what the service levels will look like, and really what the changing landscape of policing will look like, balancing that with sustainability. We've got 4 IT-related projects that are based on vendor upgrades that are required, but they are also putting us in a position where we can gain some optimization and efficiencies within the organization. So our debt target is each year the city provides us with a 10-year debt target, and the expectation is that target will be met on an annual basis. Within the service program, we have a lot of construction projects, and so those are phased on a very strict schedule. So it becomes very difficult for us to meet the targets exactly on an annual basis. But what we have done over the 10 years is met the debt target on average. So in 2016, apart from or over and above the projects that are continuing, we've got 2 brand new projects. We're starting our radio replacement project that replaces our communications radios that were previously replaced between 2006 and 2012. The life cycle of those radios was actually extended from 7 years to 10 years. So we are maximizing use of our equipment. And as I mentioned earlier, we will be reviewing the number of radios that are required for operational purposes next year. And in addition, we are also looking at archiving. Currently, we utilize city archives, but they've experienced a really serious space problem. So we are looking at making use of space at our Progress Avenue facility to meet the services retention needs. The one thing that the city has indicated is they were looking at charging us for storage services. So this project will actually look to save us about $300,000 in potential storage costs on an annual basis. So as far as the vehicle and equipment reserve is concerned, we're looking at drawing at about $260 million over the 10-year program. And that's a significant amount of money because we do have a lot of equipment in the organization. The opening balance for the 2016 or the 2016 opening balance in this reserve is going to be only about $1.4 million. So that's why it's really important for us to continue to increase those reserve contributions, which does put pressure on the operating budget, but it does allow us to continue with those life cycle replacements that are of critical equipment for the organization. As Tony mentioned, every project or lots of projects have an operating impact on them. So when we are looking at projects, when projects are proposed, the operating impact from capital, one of the objectives is to try to minimize that operating impact. But there are increases that are unavoidable, such as IT maintenance or building operation requirements, and in some cases, depending on the extent of the project, staffing. So you will see that we are looking at increasing from projects in our program, increasing our operating budget by about 1.9 million by the end of the 10-year plan. And that is in light of the work that will be creating efficiencies, but there's obviously costs and there is an investment. As the projects proceed, though, work continues on reducing the operating impact and gaining those maximum efficiencies before the final implementation occurs. So we have two, right now, what we're calling below-the-line requests. One is body-worn cameras, and the other one is Next Generation 911. Body-worn cameras were actually recommended by Justice Iacobucci in his report, Police Encounters with People in Crisis. So in 2015, we started a pilot project where we acquired 100 body-wearable cameras from 2 vendors, and we have actually put those cameras in 4 areas of the service in a project that will run until next May. We've also created a working group to develop some guidelines for the project, considering human rights, privacy, legislation, rules of engagement, as well as ensuring that if there are proper evaluation criteria and performance measure indicators to really assess what this pilot will do for the organization. So following the evaluation of the pilot, next steps will be determined. And you probably know that there are 2 board members who sit on the steering committee for this project. And finally, there's Next Generation 911, which is an emerging issue for emergency services. We actually don't have any project costs at this time because there has not been clear direction in terms of where Next Generation 911 will take us. At the end of 2014, we were required to implement the analog to digital system, which was done in the current 911 system. So that was implemented. And then there is the acceptance of multimedia formats. That is the ability to handle anything from a text or an image or a video on any type of media. And that is what the Next Generation 911 direction is taking us to, but it's not very clear. So we will be continuing to work with the city, as well as the city manager, as well as fire and emergency services on a joint capital project once that direction is clearer to all services in Ontario. So in conclusion, our program reflects the priorities of the service, which is to ensure sustainability and reduce our footprint. It's consistent with our strategic objectives, and it's in line with the city's debt-provided targets on average over the 10 years. And to reiterate, to ensure that we are following that strategic direction, we are going to be looking at a full facility realignment review, as well as a full review of radio and vehicle requirements. And that will result in cost adjustments in the 2017 to 2026 capital program.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add, I guess one of the themes in all this is, I wouldn't call it a pause, but I would call it a slowing down of our spend to really, as Sandra indicated, to really, typically you end up putting new units or units into space that you have vacant. We really want the business and the evolving demographics and automation and technology to drive what our facilities might look like, what the size of them are, how many you need. that will be part of that facility realignment. So we're slowing down with the intention of really wanting to do this the right way.
Board members' questions? I think you meant him, not you. Yes, Shelley, thank you.
I do have one, though. If we could go, I think it's slide 50, but it's a comment, it's not really on the slide, which is that there is a point at which we hit a wall for the V&E reserve, that you just sort of toss it off there. Vehicle and equipment reserve, we have to get back on track with contributions by 2018. Okay, and if we don't, at that point, we have to wildly increase how we debt fund. It's basically what
There is a pressure on debt, exactly, at that
Okay.
point.
Okay. So what would on track look like? I'm concerned that I don't have a handle on it because we have been making adjustments to it for over a number of budget years. What should we be putting into V&E reserve every year?
So the 2016 contribution has been reduced to $18 million.
Right.
We should be putting in $2.5 million more than that in 2016, and then increasing it again in 2017, and then increasing it to $1.8 million in 2018.
Which would bring us to a global total
So-
of what?
Of what? So that'll be
We were gradually phasing up to what would be a global total every
About
year
20
of.
about $24 million.
Okay, so what we should be doing, at some point, someone calculated that we've got to, through a phased approach, increase the contribution to get to 24. And the challenge we face now, if we rely on reserves to balance, is that we're now working backwards from that.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, in terms of not having those contributions in our base.
Okay, thank you.
Board members, other questions? A motion to approve, then? If there are no other questions or discussions, Councillor Lee, seconded by Ms. Mueller. All in favor? Any contrary? Any abstentions? Which additional motions? Ah. Oh, yes, okay. These are, I should have brought those up before. Those are suggestions further proposed that the chief report to the board during the 2017-21 capital program process with a planned future use of unoccupied space in the Progress facility. That the chief report to the board during the 17-12, sorry, that should be 21, not 12, and the second point on the capital program process. Any further facility realignment options based on the delivery of policing services? Shelley?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned here. These are in the context of some of the big moves we want to make.
Right.
I'm concerned that part of the culture that needs to change, because we have a tendency to lurch towards the budget year and then say, well, we got to pass this
then
budget.
stop.
This is a long-term
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
I'm thinking that similar to the TTC, that maybe those are things you simply want to refer not to the process, but to the budget subcommittee, and that budget subcommittee ought to be meeting year-round. So some of these big moves that need to be
Yeah, that's
discussed,
another- these are coming out of...
we're not waiting until
it's-
August and September of next year.
That's a better way to do it, you're right. The board has hired, as you know, a consultant to help us with the budget, so these are coming out of his suggestions. But that's probably the more appropriate way to do it, is to refer it to a budget subcommittee that would meet ongoing. And that was the intention of bringing Angelo in.
Yeah.
So that's consistent with that.
Because that way, the 2017-2021 capital program process, really our sort of annual schedule is such that they'd be talking to us about that about the same time they've got to deliver a draft of it to city staff would be about August. We got to start talking about it now, as soon as we adopt this budget. Yeah.
So rather than put those 4 motions, so we just put a motion that says that the Budget Subcommittee will continue to meet over the year to ensure that the 2017-2021 capital program process takes into account all opportunities for savings and efficiencies? Including the following, yeah. Yeah, good point. Throughout the year, throughout the coming year,
Through 2016.
through 2016.
Because we just love meetings.
To ensure that the process during the 2017-2021 capital process take into account well all efficiencies and opportunities, including the we'll make that number 1, and then we'll pop it around to the following.
We tend to forget these guys sometimes. Sandra's going to take us through the parking.
Okay. So we'll start with Deirdre, if you wouldn't mind advancing. So the objectives of parking enforcement is through enforcement activities, they ensure the safe and orderly flow of traffic. They also provide operational support to the Toronto Police Service in the form of language interpretation, stolen vehicle recovery, assisting at special events. And they really are a uniformed civilian presence in the field. They're ambassadors as well as eyes and ears of the organization. So how is parking organized? At the Toronto Police Service, we have the Parking Enforcement Unit, which is responsible for the enforcement program based on municipal bylaws, as well as training and oversight of the municipal law enforcement officers. As part of the City of Toronto, there's the City Treasurer Revenue Processing Area, which is responsible for collecting fines. There's City Court Services, which manages the judicial process, and then there's City Legal, which manages prosecutions. So we are a piece of a larger puzzle. The Toronto Police Service does not collect or accrue any of the fees. They actually all go to the City of Toronto, and they are impacted by City Council initiatives, any changes to bylaws, increased fines initiatives, as well as specialized programs. They are also influenced by enforcement levels. So that's why our goal is to ensure that our routes are covered by parking enforcement officers on a regular basis to ensure that that enforcement is maximized. Some of the factors that influence enforcement are there are changing demands to the program. So the new normal has required staff reallocations. The City and Toronto Police Service Rush Hour Initiative, for example, the City Habitual Offender Towing Program for Ontario and out of provincial plates. So they've required a realignment of our staffing. Public behavior also impacts the level of enforcement, and it's affected by decisions in changing bylaws, fines increases. So sometimes by doing those things and increasing enforcement, you actually get them to change their behavior, do what you want them to do, but that will impact obviously compliance as well as revenues accruing to the city. There's also staff attrition, vacancies, and training time that have to be factored into enforcement, and adverse weather conditions as well as levels of construction also factor how much enforcement can actually occur. So in a nutshell, the parking enforcement unit is asking for an overall budget increase of 2.33%. That factors in a 2% salary settlement and then a marginal 0.32% or 31%, there's some rounding in there, increase related to other items. So just to take you through a little bit, some of the larger ones, benefits. The parking enforcement unit is actually experiencing the same increase in benefits that the service is. So they are part of the same collective agreement and benefit plan. So we're also looking at them as well as the service as a whole and working with our provider to get more information and try to better understand what's happening as far as benefit usage is required or benefit usage that's occurring. We've had a reduction in supplies and equipment due to some efficiencies and some streamlining in that area. And there's also a drop of about 0.04% or larger, 18,000 for revenues. Those revenues are the result of draws from reserves as well as towing and pound administrative recoveries. And that's it. So that's it as far as parking, pretty quick.
Questions for Sandra?
Because this is the last presentation, I have a question that relates to this and a request that may be possible in relation to both the civilian and uniform personnel. I'm thinking about the average cost of an FTE based on the category that they occupy. So you have the cost of a parking enforcement official, the cost of a civilian employee, and the cost of a uniform employee. I know there's risk in oversimplifying that every FTE gets paid exactly the same for the purpose of an average, but I have found that that's actually a useful portrait. So I'm wondering if maybe that can be a piece of information you bring forward if you don't have it at your fingertips.
And we can do that, and certainly break it down into keys. So if you look at communication operators, we break that down, perhaps in direct support and then true admin. So we can give you maybe 5 or 6 different categories with the average salary in each one.
And I'm really thinking of it as an FTE, which I know isn't the perfect example, but not so much what they do, which I think is the next step around how the work gets done. Thank you.
Anybody else? Jen?
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last page, 64. When I add up the totals, it doesn't seem to add up a percentage change in the last 3 cells. 0.31%, you add 2%, and then it adds up to 2.33. Shouldn't be 2.31? Okay.
No. That's too much rounding. Okay. Any other further questions? If not, Chin, you're going to move it. Councillor Lee? Seconder? Councillor Carroll? All in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Tony, Sandra, thank you very much for all the work, which will continue, at least until the whatever date in November we picked. But thank you for all of that. Is there any other business that anybody wishes to bring up? If not, may I have a motion to adjourn? Danuria, seconded by Chen Li. All in favor? Thank you. Thank you, everybody, very much. No, I don't think so, Carl.